Now, South Africa is sitting out of G20 meetings while the U.S. is in charge because the two countries are currently at odds. After President Donald Trump signaled that South Africa was not welcome at U.S.-hosted events, South African officials realized that they would be blocked at the door anyway. Now, since the U.S. holds the keys to the meetings, that's the official entry passes, South Africa is choosing to step back rather than fight for a seat that they will not be given. They are calling this a temporary setback and plan to jump back in once the UK takes over the G20 leadership in 2027. They're not too worried about Africa losing its voice in the meantime, as they expect the African Union to pick up the slack. But for now, they're just waiting out the clock until the presidency shifts to a more friendly host. Now joining us to speak on this, we have Ejike Okpa. He's a global affairs analyst in Texas, USA. Thank you so much, Ejike, for joining us at this time. All right, Ejike, this has actually been called a temporary setback. What is actually going on in the G20? Because it's been called a temporary setback because talking about the fundamental breakdown of the G20's rules. And I was saying that if the U.S. can use the accreditation as a visa-style weapon to bar a permanent member, hasn't the G20 effectively ceased to be a multilateral forum and become instead a private club for Washington?
No, I don't think so. I mean, when you say G20, I mean, there are almost 200 countries in the world. So not every country in the world is a member of G20. If South Africa, for whatever reason, decide to pull out because, Trump is becoming the president, that's a choice of them to make. I don't think countries have to be forced, to belong to anything. You can cultivate relationship based on your own national interest, or what do you think you're going to achieve from that relationship. Just like, the Board of Peace, something, and people are getting bent out of shape. We haven't even formalized what that is going to look at, and everybody's jumping up and down and saying stuff. Sometimes you just have to pull back and say an announcement doesn't necessarily become a policy. Until that policy is in place, then you can react and say, okay, how does this suit me? Yes, we all live in a global village, but at the same time, each individual country has responsibility first to their own nation before they talk about their neighboring or regional country. So what you're seeing is everybody's running all over the place, talking about democracy, talking about multilateralism. But, we don't have one global passport. If we also love each other, what we should do, collapse all the 200 and so passports and just get work. So we don't even have to require visa. Just go anywhere you want and go do whatever you want. But that's ain't going to happen. So it comes down to each country leadership deciding, with their own, parliament or Congress, say, hey, this is what we're going to do. Nobody has all the answers, but, like in the animal kingdom, all animals are equal, but some are more equal than others by design or default. And we can say it, America, yes, America doesn't get what America wants, but sometimes because of the power of influence, not necessarily authority, an American president can say something, and everybody else start to run around.
All right, Ejike, but then, South Africa is, the one individual African country, as a member of the G20, and we're seeing reports, that the U.S. is positioning Poland to take a more prominent role while blocking South Africa. So wouldn't you say that this is a strategic attempt to Europeanize the G20 and push the only permanent African member to the margins?
I don't see it that way. Just like in UN, when UN was formed about 8 years ago, the only African country that was independent at the time was Egypt in 1922, and then Ghana joined. Of all of that, what has either the UN or the G7 or the G20 gotten Africa? Yes, just like in any relationship, for better, for worse, maybe you cannot handle the worst anytime, and then you decide to get a divorce. When you get a divorce, what you need to do is get a new partner that is making the former person jealous of you. So if you're just going to sit there and complain and whine, The world is looking for you to compete, not for you to just come and complain. The 54 African countries, they have the largest contingent of nations in the UN. What has that gotten them? What has that gotten them, even within themselves? How many African countries are trading with themselves? You look at the volume of trade between African countries, is the lowest of all the continental, relationships in the world. So Africans need to start focusing on what matters to them, as opposed to whether it's Europeanized or whether it's the southern, hemisphere relationship. No. Can South Africa trade with Zimbabwe? Can Nigeria trade with Ghana and trade with whomever is around it to build goods and services that, first of all, before they leave the continent, is purchased by somebody next to you? Not just get caught up on, whether it's white or Asian. I mean, look at now, the Chinese are over there in Africa dictating to them, because you couldn't even formalize, sustain a relationship with your former colonial people. Forget all of that. Focus is now time for you to internalize your strength, because when you internalize your strength, then you're going to get credible or become credible on the international scene. But since most African countries haven't achieved that, everybody plays game with them. They become a toss-up. They become they become a country you can ignore and nothing happens. And it's because they haven't paid attention to themselves. Not AU, not SADC, not East African Union, not ECOWAS, not the Central African Union. So again, when you get kicked around, at the time comes where you say, you know what, watch me go do it. The world oftentimes respects people who say no, as opposed to who says yes. Right? If they replace Poland and so what? Well, what has that got to do with South Africa wanting to do something with Mozambique or Zimbabwe or whomever else is close to them? That's what the attention should be.
All right, now you just talked about, African countries partnering with each other and trading with each other. And we know that the U.S. House recently passed a 3-year extension of AGOA, but South Africa's inclusion remains quite unclear. So with over $3.2 billion, in duty-free exports at stake, can the South African economy, which is already struggling with high unemployment, will they be able to survive being cut out of the American market?
Yes, they can survive, but so who else needs whatever it is they're sending to America? Which other African country needs it? Again, what's the population of the entire African countries? Probably 1 billion. So can you find in that 54 nation, coalition or relationship, who else can take your good? Again, that's what I'm saying. It's a strategic thing. It's not a sympathy thing. The world has never had one umbrella where everybody's singing kumbaya. What the world is always looking for is effective relationships. And when those relationships you entered into is not working for you, as a nation, you reserve the right to pull out. Just like in a marriage, you all go to the wedding, everybody sings and drinks, and then you go home 1 or 2 years or some decades after you find out you want to get out. You should be able to pull out. So, the trade, AGOA, in case you don't know, AGOA is not what Africa needs. Africa needs FTA. Of the 54 African countries, only Morocco has an FTA. FTA is the free trade agreement, is the highest agreement you can have with America and be able to do something more. AGOA is not what it is. But if AGOA is extended and South Africa is afraid of losing their $5 billion in trade they do, then look somewhere else. If you want to go trade with China or Russia, whatever, you are entitled to do it. But at the end of the day, you make sure that whoever you trade in, whatever relationship you get in, has to benefit you. It's no longer master or servant. It's not apartheid situation. It's not a colonial, thing. The divorce is over. The only former Commonwealth nation that did well is Singapore. The Singapore GDP is higher than that of England, because when UK started to make Singapore look like you have to come back into the fold, Singapore said, heck no. You go read the book, Lee Kuan Yew years. He said, no, we're not doing this. We're going to go find new relationships. So of all the former Commonwealth of Nations, Singapore has the highest, because they defied the idea of having to run back to UK and belong to that, Commonwealth something. And they found a relationship that has worked for them. Can somebody else do it? What is the population of Singapore? You know, it's smaller than the population of South Africa, and even Nigeria, that is the biggest of populated nation in that Commonwealth. How are they doing? So my thing is about relationship, and relationship has to favor you. If it doesn't favor you, get out of it. You don't have to look to white people to do anything for you. You don't have to look to Asians to do anything for you, because Africa as a continent is not a new invention. Africa has existed just like everybody else, but it sort of shocks everybody. All
right, now speaking of Africa as a continent, we know that the African Union is a permanent member of the G20, and they're representing the whole continent, right, in the G20. And South Africa has said that the African Union will still represent the continent's voice. But the African Union is a body of, 55 nations with often conflicting interests. So how can a massive bureaucratic AU reasonably represent South Africa's specific $400 billion industrial interests in the finance track?
Again, that's why I said you don't have to get into this global, intercontinental umbrella or blanket. You still, as a nation, go out and craft a relationship. If South Africa feels that their own economy is, will be negatively impacted if America or their membership in G7, G20 is pulled, or they pull out of it, then go in and say why. What do I have to do differently in order for me to get back into the fold? Or maybe I need to take a break. I don't have to be in this stuff. Sometimes you have to rejig, your movement. You have to renew your own strength and your weaknesses. You don't have to, there's no permanent membership in anything. The world is full of friends and foes. And if sometimes, those friends pull away, those times your enemy becomes your friend. But you have to be the one that is willing to always review each opportunity and see whether that opportunity makes sense for you. If it doesn't, if it doesn't do it, I'll give you an example. Okay, I live in Dallas, Texas. I don't care what the exchange rate of the dollar is doing with Naira or, Rand or anything. What my concern is the mortgage payment. If that mortgage payment, can I make it every time? So what these countries need to do, how is my policy enabling capacity development and, within my own country with my own currency? You don't have to subject your currency to the devaluation of another if in your own country that currency is relevant. You can build Nigeria economy with the Naira. You don't have to chase money everywhere because you're entitled to your sovereign currency and the value has to favor you. If it doesn't favor you, say no. You say, no, we're not going to do it. There's a book that was written called The 3 Days at Camp David that made the dollar start to become the preferred currency of the world. If you read that book, there's no magic to it. It's just that during Nixon time, Nixon put as America is going to get out of the bullion standard. So you could get out of having to go to the World Bank or the IMF and focus on using your local currency, to pay for your goods and services. If anybody's going to trade with you, you trade with me my currency, I am not going to do it. Again, the world diplomacy requires people that are bold. And, I say it all the time, God favors the bold, not the meek. Most African countries are meek. They think being humble, is all it takes. You don't have to be humble. It's a competitive world. You have to be willing to compete. And sometimes you got to raise your finger in front of somebody and say, watch me do it. I'm not going to be part of this anymore. That's when they even respect you. But if you go constantly, every time they do something, you're bending over, you're trying to appease them or beg with them, they don't care. The Western world don't care about people who are weak. That's why the Europeans came to North America and displaced the Native Americans and took their land. And we took the land from Mexico. We took the land from, Canada, because Canada used to be part of America. We took all of that. Did we do it because we were meek? We did it because we were bold.
Okay.
And if you...
all right. Well, I wish we had more time, and I wish Professor Ntsikelelo Breakfast joined us. We would have loved to hear his own side to this, his own opinion to all of this. But thank you so much, Ejike Okpa, Global Affairs Analyst, for joining us and speaking on this.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you.